22, and I'm here in the Dallas, Texas area on a cloudy day, but it's around 70 degrees right now. It's supposed to be a high of 75, and it will start to turn cooler actually tomorrow and over the next week. So this might be the last warm day of the fall season here in Texas, and I am starting a little bit earlier than I normally would, and the reason why is because I've got a personal session, Inner Healing and Deliverance, that starts at 12 noon my time centrally. We've been very busy with doing personal sessions, also doing mentoring sessions. I don't often mention our mentoring sessions, but if anyone's interested in having us to basically be able to bounce some questions off of and ask us for some dream interpretations and giving some wisdom and guidance in situations. My wife and I both do mentoring sessions. So if you're interested, you can always reach out again to my assistant Tina at tinak@restoredtofreedom.com. For those of you who want personal inner healing and deliverance sessions, reach out to Tina as well for those. But again, I've this week have been especially busy because the last 2 weeks I have been too busy to do them because we've been moving from Atlanta, Georgia to the Dallas area. So we are enjoying getting to know the local folks here in Texas. They've all been very hospitable and very much surprising me that a lot of them that we've had discussions what we do in our ministry are extremely interested. And some of them that I would never have guessed, local barbers and people that are managing storage units and so forth that know about Jezebel, know about deliverance here in Texas. So it's exciting. And there's also other people that are now reaching out, wanting to connect with us because maybe they have some ministry. Some of them are doing deliverance ministries in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Metroplex as they call it. So anyways, that's why I'm doing this a little bit earlier than I normally would. Is because I want to make sure I have enough time to conclude before I go into sessions. So, all right, so the Breakthrough Tour continues. The next event that we have is December the 3rd. That's here in Dallas at the Courtyard in Plano, Texas. We had, we keep getting more and more people that are signing up for it. So I'm hopeful that we can fit them all in. Right now we've got about 50, I think, signed up on Eventbrite and another 25 on Facebook. So about 75 folks, and hopefully we can fit them all in there. If not, maybe we'll have to put the chairs very close together. So anyways, and then the next event at this point is in April, but we're going to schedule another couple events in January and February. But the next confirmed event is April 15th and 16th at the Fountain Gate Church in Merkel, Texas, which is west of Abilene, which is also west of Dallas. All right, so the topic of the day is the importance of marrying a delivered believer. And the Lord gave me this word this morning, wrote it actually when I was in bed. It took me about 30 minutes or so. And essentially, it is so imperative, the importance of marrying a person that's actually delivered. And so this is how it normally works, is you have a couple that falls in love and they're churchgoers, we'll say, and they go to church and they date and spend a lot of time together, then they get married. And then typically over the course of, it could be a couple of weeks, it could also be a couple months, but typically you'll have one person that tends to want to make all the decisions or make more of the decisions. And if they don't get their way, then they don't like it, and they will try to control the other person, try to manipulate that person to doing what they want. And if they don't get their way, then they'll throw a fit, or they won't do what you want them to do, and they'll create some strife, and then it can tend to get worse and worse over time. And oftentimes you see people not being able to tolerate that control manipulation once they get to like year 18, 19, 20, and oftentimes can lead into a divorce. And both parties can be spirit-filled, praying in tongues, prophesying, Christians, but if one of them, doesn't have to be both, but if one of them have been hurt really deeply, oftentimes from their fathers or their mothers, or sexual violations, or could be bullied, some type of wounding that they've never truly gotten over, which means that they still talk about it probably frequently, or they will trigger on you on occasion. Oftentimes they'll trigger, sometimes multiple times a day, but you will not have a consistency of peace within the marriage for very long. It may last a day, it may last 3 days, but typically they can't go longer than a week or so before they start to trigger again. And they trigger into this, what's called an alternate personality, where they become someone that they're normally not. You know, they're very demanding, more controlling. They could give you the silent treatment, and it's because they've got soul wounds that have not been healed yet. And again, the church has done a very horrible job of helping people get healed and delivered. The church has done a horrible job on explaining how Christians will still have demonic spirits. Just because you ask Jesus to come into your heart does not take away the legal rights that demons have to torment your soul, which is your mind, your will, your emotions. That's why you can pray in tongues, like that. You can pray in tongues and yet still trigger on people behind closed doors. Get really mad, get really angry, be very selfish, you want your own way, look at pornography, sexually, essentially abuse your spouse, or at least emotionally abuse your spouse. And then you keep it all hush-hush behind closed doors because we're supposed to be good little Christians. And the demonic spirits on a person who has the upper hand in the relationship and controlling you will oftentimes have an implied threat that if you dare tell anybody about the abuse that they're giving to you, then they're going to really be mad at you because you essentially are theirs. They own you, is how that they look at it. And so anyway, I wrote a quick blog that I posted on Facebook and YouTube. I'm not really going to read it because I know it. So let me just go through this. So essentially this is what happens is you normally see a couple come together. They're both church-going people. They could both be praying in tongues. Doesn't matter. If they're not healed of their soul wounds and not delivered, they're not going to be an enjoyable person to be around for very long in a close relationship, because they will be either extremely jealous, be extremely controlling, very prideful, very arrogant, demanding, wanting their own way. And typically what will happen is eventually the marriage will degrade, and they may go to counseling. And if they do allow you to go to counselors, then they will essentially want to control that dialogue going on. They'll either try to have sidebar conversations, private conversations with the counselor to convince them that you are the victim, or that they are the victim, the abuser is the victim, and that you are the abuser. They'll try to trade things, and if they can get the counselor on their side to control you even more, then you get hurt and abused even more, and then the relationship denigrates even worse. But if the counselor can see through their lies and then tries to confront them, then what will happen is they will not want to have counseling anymore. They will leave. So they oftentimes will just refuse to continue on with that person. So the demons in them don't want them to be delivered. And if the person wants to be delivered, then that's great. We can work with them. We can get them healed and delivered. But if they don't want to, then they will not get delivered. And that's how it works. But it would be very helpful to pastors and counselors to all learn about inner healing and deliverance. If not, then it's not going to work. So anyways, it is extremely important for us to learn about all this. And I did write a book. I see that my wife had commented here on YouTube called Choosing a Godly Mate. That's very helpful in seeing some of the red flags before you get married. And that's why the longer that you can wait to get married, it increases the percentage that person might start to manifest on you before you say I do. And then if they choose not to get healed and delivered before you get married, then you know that, okay, now I am not to marry you. that would not be healthy for me, and I need to move on down the road. But it's very hard. If you have more of the spirit of Ahab, you tend to want to have a person make the decisions, call the shots. You feel safe and secure in that. You tend to. But once you say, I do, that person will oftentimes become a different person. It's an alternate personality that they will trigger, and they will try to control you, try to manipulate you. And again, they can call themselves a Christian. Again, I hear from thousands of pastors and or pastors' wives that said, please help me. You know, my pastor's a husband, or my husband's a pastor, but he abuses me behind closed doors, very, very emotionally shuts me down, controls me, berates me, and is now hurting our children. And our children now are being tried to be turned away from me, turned against me. And so that's what the spirit of Jezebel essentially does. And that's why we focus on explaining this to people, allowing them to see that they can get their wounds healed, they can get delivered, but they have to want to. If they don't want to, we cannot override it. And it is the truth that sets people free. And so many that are simply looking at their spouse initially, physically, are they attracted to them? And then the person that is controlling will oftentimes hide that demonic spirit in them. Jezebel will try to hide, try to bite their tongue while they're dating you until they can get you to say, I do. So typically first marriages you'll see that will oftentimes be longer. And then when you marry again, a second time, then those who have that spirit of Jezebel want you to be married to them quickly, because they cannot tolerate being nice to you, loving and kind, for very long. You know, they have to bite their tongue. It's extremely hard for them to let you make the decisions on where to eat, you know, what to wear, how to do your hair, and all these things. They want to control, manipulate you. And so the quicker that they can marry you, the quicker that they can pull that mask off and then let you have it and be very controlling and very manipulative. That's why we see oftentimes these second marriages that can oftentimes be worse than the first. You know, again, the person as Jezebel will always look at themselves as a victim, poor, pitiful me. And if they won't be honest with themselves, they normally aren't, then they'll blame you and they'll throw you under the bus, and then they'll lie about you to as many people that will listen to them. And then essentially you get into that marriage, if it's the second marriage, and it can be even worse. That's why it's so critical that pastors learn about inner healing and deliverance. They need to teach this in the seminaries. They need to teach this in Bible college, and they don't do it. Why? Because Satan doesn't want them to know about this. Satan wants to be in the church, especially in leaders, so that Satan can control and hurt people that are already hurting. And that's why Satan does not want churches to talk about inner healing and deliverance. That's why they want to cause people to believe that Christians don't need deliverance at all. And that's ridiculous. Just because you ask Jesus to come into your heart means all the demons have to leave? No, they don't, and they won't. They have legal rights to stay as long as you have unforgiveness for people that have hurt you, as long as you have pride in you, as long as you are continuing to live a life full of sin. And that's what most Christians do. That's where their life is at. That's why we teach how to truly change a person into having the fruit of the Spirit like Jesus. You know, that's really what makes a Christian, is if you have the same fruit as Jesus. If you don't, if you continue to struggle with all kinds of addictions, all kinds of strife in your marriage and so forth, then you need to look in the mirror at yourself and say, Lord, what do I need to change? What do I need to get healed from? And be honest. And the Lord will be there to say, listen, you need to forgive your father, you need to forgive your mother, you need to forgive your uncle, forgive your grandpa, forgive all the people that have hurt you. You need to forgive people that have touched you sexually, molested you sexually, that you've never told anyone about. You need to, you have to go to them. You simply forgive them from your heart. You ask Jesus to come to speak to you and show you those people from his perspective, and you will see that they were all hurt too, and they had demons, and they hurt you. And then when you truly forgive, it takes away legal rights of the demons to give you those thoughts in your head. Then you can take the thoughts captive. You can command the demons to go. And then you have a lot of peace. You actually have fruit of the Spirit, like Jesus did. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And so that's why it's so critical that before you marry someone, that you take some time to discuss with them about their wounds, about their process of being healed of those wounds and forgiving them and to being delivered from them. Because if they've never gone through any type of inner healing and deliverance, if they just say, oh yeah, I've forgiven them, then oftentimes those demons will hide within them, allow them to make themselves not react, not manifest on you until later. And then once you get married to them, then they typically take the gloves off and the mask off, and then they start to trigger on you, trigger, and come against you and try to hurt you and try to wound you. So, there's a kitty cat here named Miss Kitty that is meowing. She's kind of like the neighbor cat that she goes from home to home and gets food given to her. So yes, her name is Miss Kitty. All right. So if you do get married to a person that's not healed of their wounds and not delivered like most of us do, is there any hope to save the marriage? Now I'll explain this. Understand this from the spiritual aspect. If you're hurt and you're wounded, you get married to somebody that was also hurt and wounded, you will typically see in about 85% of relationships a Jezebel-Ahab relationship. People that struggle with the spirit of Jezebel have a much harder time getting delivered from that. Can you get delivered? Of course. We kind of specialize in that in our ministry, and we've seen thousands of people who have been healed, who have been delivered of that spirit. The Ahab spirit is a little bit easier to get delivered from because the Ahab spirit just simply tolerates people that have Jezebel, tries to look the other way. They tend to not want to control and make a person do what they want, whereas Jezebel does that. And Jezebel tends to not ask for forgiveness once they do what they've done. They normally will blame the spouse and say, it's all your fault, the reason why I'm controlling and manipulating you. Although they don't normally say it that way, but they'll normally shift the blame to you. So let's say that you guys do get into a marriage like that. Well, the enemy, Satan's goal, is to marry up a person who wants to do what God wants with a person that has his spirit of Jezebel, because he knows that spirit of Jezebel will try to ruin the other person's life that might try to do what God wants them to do. And if he can get them to marry, then great. Now they're going to have a lot of strife, a lot of arguments. If they have children, then Jezebel will tend to hurt their own children, try to turn their children away from the spouse that has Ahab, lie about the spouse and so forth, cause that child to hate them. And Jezebel will try to inflict a lot of pain and wounds in the child themselves. If that child ever pulls away, then they want nothing to do with the child, and that's how it works. So can they get healed and delivered after the fact, after they're married? Yes, they can. It is much more difficult, because at that point they have got their soul ties, their sexual covenants with you, and then that will come down the line with the children. But can they get delivered? Of course they can. They can, but it's not easy to get a person that would be deemed a narcissist set free and delivered. Again, most psychiatrists, psychologists would say there's no hope for a person that is actually a narcissist. And I say, well, there is hope. They can get healed and delivered, but it's not a given. So it's very challenging, because they have to be honest with their bad behavior. They have to look in the mirror at themselves and say, oh my gosh, maybe I'm the one that's the reason why this marriage is breaking down. Yes, it is true. The responsibility will lie squarely on the person that struggles more with Jezebel. Now, you can have two Jezebels marry themselves. You can, to each other. You have one, though, that's more extreme, more demanding, marries one that's more subtle in there. But 85% of marriages are going to be Jezebel and Ahab. So the challenge is getting the Jezebel to own their own stuff and getting healed and delivered. And it's so important, because you see this all the time, where you have a person that marries one that's got a lot of wounds, a lot of demonic spirits, and it ruins their life, and they tend to lie about them horribly to other people. You know, I went through this myself. So how do I know this? This is why. This is how I know. I've walked through this myself. I've had some relationships. I understand it clearly, and I know how it works. And if people have never gone through this, which there's a percentage of people that never have, then they would have no clue what a person's capable of of being lied about, being abused behind closed doors, and then having that person lie about all the things and try to blame them and accuse them of being the abuser and accuse themselves of being a victim. You know, you would have no clue that a person's capable of lying to that level. Well, they can, and they do. They're very much sociopathic is what the psychologist would be calling them, and of course narcissistic. So, but can they get delivered? Yes, we've seen them. We've seen a lot of them get delivered, thousands of them, but it's extremely hard because they have to be honest with that. So again, if you end up marrying someone who is very Jezebelic, then it's going to be one of the worst situations a human being could go through, you know, outside of satanic ritual abuse. Um, so again, I can speak from experience. So I can tell you, my wife can speak from experience. We know this. We know how it works. So again, majority of couples, when they first get married, they don't go through inner healing and deliverance. So the first thing a pastor needs to do is to learn about inner healing and deliverance and take both prospective husband and wife through that before they marry them. Because otherwise you're setting them up to be hurt, especially the one that's an Ahab, to be hurt horribly. And it's very sad, you know. So if I were a pastor, I would learn about the soul wound healing deliverance process, and I would take everybody through this. I remember there was a pastor up in Wisconsin. He said, I will never marry anyone that's not gone through inner healing and deliverance. You know, sadly, most pastors are just saying, well, let's go through this course of 8 weeks or 12 weeks that's preparing you for getting married. But they do nothing about getting that person's wounds healed and delivered from their demons. That's the number one thing you should do. And again, if you don't do that, then you're setting yourself up for a life of where you're married to the enemy. Remember the movie Sleeping with the Enemy? You know, it's true. You end up getting married to someone that you believe is going to love you, and then they turn on you. They become your enemy. And they ultimately are saying things emotionally to try to essentially kill you slowly over time. And you can get cancer, you can get sickness, you can get disease. I know of a woman that died from being with her husband too long. Literally died. And he acted so sweet. He acted so nice. You would never guess it. I saw him at church all the time. And then after that, I talked with his son, teenage son, and the son told me how he behaved behind closed doors. And it was horrible. Horrible. The children left as soon as they graduated from high school. Every single one of them that got out of there. They wanted nothing to do with their father because he was emotionally abusive behind closed doors. And the negative words that he spoke to his wife caused her to have a tumor, brain tumor, when she was like 40, and she died. And then he gets remarried to another woman, and she was healthy until about 6 months into it, and then she got all this negative verbal abuse, and then she started getting sicker and sicker. And then they came to see me, and I tried to get him delivered, and he really refused to, did not want to take the responsibility, and now he has cancer. So that's how it works, people, is that if we don't get healed and delivered, and you call yourself a believer, which they will, and they can say, well, gee, they can pray in tongues. They're a Christian. If anybody prays in tongues, that was my litmus test, at least I thought it was, is if a person prays in tongues, they're a solid Christian. No. No, 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 no. They can be horrible. They can throw knives at you and glasses behind closed doors. That's what I endured with my ex-wife. She was, I was her fourth husband, and they had short relationships, the previous 3. And so she was hurt by her father, extremely hurt by her mother, extremely hurt by sexual violation. She had a lot of demonic spirits, and I saw them within my own eyes, how she would change, how she would trigger, how her personality would change. Multiple times every day. For 6 years, I endured it in silence. Didn't say a word to anyone because the Lord told me not to. So I suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered. And then I learned after the 6 years that that was what was called the spirit of Jezebel. So I got to see the extreme version of Jezebel. And it was scary. I mean, having knives thrown at you, glasses thrown at you, having your arms scarred by fingernails, verbally, emotionally being hurt, and so forth. So, and they want to control you. They're extremely jealous. They want to ruin your life. They want to stop you from doing ministry. You know, I was getting ready to start doing ministry, wanted her to help me. Well, she couldn't. She was continually manifesting in demons and then tried to stop me from doing it. So oftentimes Satan wants to set up his people with Jezebel to marry a person, and it was never ordained by God. Now it may be that it was for a training purpose, that the Lord, you know, the Lord's not going to stop us from our own free will. And the Lord, at times, I explain this, can lead you into relationships that turn out to be really bad, but it's because you have a future ministry the Lord's going to use you with. And you need to know it. You need to know about these demonic spirits. If you're going to have a marriage ministry, you better know about Jezebel and Ahab. You better know about inner healing and deliverance. If you don't, you'll never be able to help anyone. They'll be trying to surfacely try to tell them, you need to behave better. Well, like, we know that. You tell me about it. Of course, the spouse needs to behave better, but he can't if he's hearing or she's hearing demonic thoughts thousands of times a day. They're going to trigger and trigger and trigger behind closed doors, and then they're going to act all sweet and nice in front of people in the church. It's how it works, and that's how it is. So it's extremely critical, extremely important that you marry a person that is delivered, and you have probably less than 5% of a chance of seeing that, because most people are not, because the church has done a horrible job of getting people healed and delivered. They want to explain that you're a Christian, you can't have demons, and that's what Satan's lie is to the church and to many people in leadership. And then the people say, well, gee, my spouse is horrible. How do we get it fixed? Well, let's go talk to the doctor. Let's talk to counselors. Let's talk to people that can give us medication. None of that fixes it. Inner healing and deliverance fixes it all. Inner healing and deliverance is what people need. And if they don't get it, then you can counsel all you want, and it's never going to change a person, because their demons don't want them to be freed. And that's why we got to speak the truth, give them the freedom to choose right from wrong, and choose to get healed and delivered. And if they refuse to, then you're not going to see any changes. And then you got to make the decision. You know, God told me, who are you going to serve, the demons in your spouse or me? And I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. I'm like, yeah, as long as I continue to stay linked to this person that's demonic, I can't do anything. I can't do ministry. I can't do what God's called me to do, because they're stopping me, and they don't want to get delivered. Their demons want to stay there, and they want to keep their demons there. So you may have to make a decision. You can't make an idol before anyone. It could be your wife, it could be your husband. God doesn't want us to make idols. He's in the process now of connecting a lot of people to their kingdom spouse, but there's Satan there all the time trying to connect people to Satan's spouse for you, and you don't even know it. So when you're unequally yoked, they're not a believer, you know, and they can call themselves a believer. They can call themselves a Christian. They can go to church. They can put their hands up, praise the Lord. They can pray in tongues. But who are they behind closed doors? Do they manifest? Do they trigger? If they do, then they're an undelivered believer, and that is a demonic believer at that point. They need healed and delivered. So, alrighty. Well, I try to keep this to 30 minutes, and I know I started 10 minutes early because I have a session now in 10 minutes. So I am going to say goodbye. Now, tomorrow I have a session that I will not be able to do a teaching live tomorrow, and it is Veterans Day, so I am not going to be doing any live tomorrow, and I'll see you guys then on Monday. So, alrighty, we will see you guys later. Bye-bye.